keep them in. We know that these kids are not, are skipping class, and we don't want them to. We want to figure out why they're skipping class, what will keep them in class. This is where Marc, so then the next, and Marc said, oh, now we're going to start our PDSA cycles, where we plan to try something to fix it and collect data. And that statement, that step, well, what do we do about it? You could now collect data. We're interviewing kids. Why did you drop out of CTE? You could talk to the teachers. You could talk to their parents. You could go to the literature. I don't know. And then you get a plan. So my question is, at this step, where you're now ready, I think, each of you, to make a plan in response to a specific identified problem, and then collect data as part of the plan data collection to see if this plan works, then hopefully fail quickly, improve the whole improvement science thingy. What are you doing to figure out, okay, how do we address now that we know what we need to fix?
Anyone want to go first on that?
So I'm just, the last part, how do we know what we need to fix?
Well, you want to fix it.
Yeah.
You want to improve attendance.
Right.
And specifically reduce skipping, it seems like you're at that one.
Mm-hmm.
But now, what do we do to do it? Do we create
That's a great,
scanning?
yeah, no, that's a great question.
Do we
Yeah.
punitive? How
Yeah.
do we figure out what to do next?
Again, this morning we were in a meeting where that very question, 5 different people put 5 different answers on what do we do about it. One person said, well, the kids want incentives, and 98% of the people in the room rolled their eyes and said, oh no, that's not going to work, right? And so I think it's the process of trying that those things start to bubble up in the doing part, right? So it's as we're moving along, I think with this group, they find something that's agreeable to them all, and they start there, right? And then let's move to once we get a taste of learning something, then we're potentially more likely to try something new. Another big one that I think, quite frankly, is quite difficult for us is there's people that have been in these buildings for 30 years. And they are very quick to pull out, we tried that one already, right? And that's valuable knowledge, that's experiential knowledge, but often, sometimes that just puts the brakes on everything. And so I think as that team trusts each other, I think they're willing to pause and let someone take lead and try something. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but I think it comes through this team atmosphere where they trust each other to put out an idea, number one, and then once that data system is there, you can see it, did it work? Instead of relying on, well, it didn't work 25 years ago, right? So I think
So your method is basically brainstorming?
brainstorming with data to back it up. Brainstorming and having ideas are great. Having data to show which ones are good and which ones you should throw away is vital to this process. And that being in a space where the data comes back and it didn't work, it's not your fault, right? That we tried it, it didn't work. We're here to work on this problem, to improve on this problem. Let's move forward. So like the other team that came with their project already, their solution, boy, they couldn't give that up. When it was not looking like it was working, it was really, really hard to even have a conversation with them that says, there might be something else we should try, right? Because they were focused on, they owned it, and they were not going to let it go. So I think it's brainstorming, but it's brainstorming and then kicking the bad ones away.
What would you not do? This is why I'm asking again. Would you not do, for example, interviewing students to say, well, why did you skip class?
No. That's part of the data gathering process. I'll give a very clear example. One girl, why are you skipping class? She was looking for a microwave. She was skipping her 3rd block because she was walking the halls looking for a microwave where she wouldn't get in trouble. She's a new immigrant. She doesn't like the cafeteria food because, unfortunately, Baltimore cafeteria food is not Nepali food. It doesn't fit her culture, right? She's vegetarian. She can't eat anything. But she was trying to search for a microwave where she wouldn't get in trouble. That was done through the AP, actually talking to kids. And that seems innocuous and like, I can't believe you're missing math for that. But it was important. And so it's that is data that can come into this process. And when we keep pushing them. what do we know about these 60 kids? Have you talked to them? Have you asked them why they're not coming to class? And have you asked them 4 times? Because the first time is, I don't know. And the next time is, well, I'm bored. And then the next time is, well, I actually get sleepy after lunch. And then the next time is, at some point you start to get to that. So I think it's part of it. You can't do this without some of that work, right? And that's the part of knowing your situation, knowing the context. Sorry.
Right. Pretty good. The other part of your question you asked was about CTE specifically. Well, it's a shared, and I'm glad that Dr. Stein brought up the conversation about students must be involved in the solution. We can't continue to experiment and guess without using that valuable data that comes directly from the recipients of the supports and services. In terms of CTE specifically, I think we as an institution have to do a better job of promoting the value that engagement strategies like career and technical education pose for students and the opportunities in terms of those end goals, how they're aligned with student needs. But at the end of the day, the reason why students drop out are the same reasons why students drop out of school. Their needs aren't being met. So we as an institution have to do a better job of assessing what those needs are and eliminating the barriers that are preventing them from being successful, not just in CTE, but also at school. Does that answer your question, sir? Okay. All right.
Thank you. I had 2 questions. I'll ask them both, and feel free to talk about something more interesting than either. But Dr. McDowell, while you were speaking, one of your slides indicated daily observation of 9th grade teachers, I believe. And I was interested to hear more about who's doing those observations, what type of support are they getting, what are they looking for, how is that information being transferred back to 9th grade teachers? That's question 1. And then on a pretty different note, Dr. Stein, I was interested in your, you turned down the first question that you were asked, which was about how do we get, it was about the ability to get students to pass math and the science courses, I believe, and you drilled down to this attendance question. And you had a brief mention of pedagogical questions kind of being tricky. And I'm wondering, is that a limitation of improvement science? Are there questions that improvement science is not well equipped to answer? Or is it simply that they weren't asking the right question or part of the trust? But I just would love to hear more about that thought process as well.
Thank you.
Okay. So in answer to your question, in terms of the observations, I think it's one point of clarity to make sure that we're talking about development, not evaluation. So each of the organizations, so specifically the 20 neighborhood high schools, each of them is configured a little bit differently based on staffing level, enrollment, thematic approach. So the expectation is that daily classroom observations and feedback are taking place for the purpose of being able to drill down and ensure that students aren't falling behind, that students are engaged, that instruction is meaningful. That can come in the form of directly from the corresponding academy principal, which is the assistant principal of record. It could come in the form of a teacher leader, but it also could come in the form of a mentor teacher that's housed within that same building. Many of our strongest teachers have formally requested to move to 9th grade because they know that 9th grade is such a pivotal year. And the only way that we're going to be able to improve specifically within some of the most challenging classrooms is to have the strongest teachers. But having the strongest teachers is not sufficient if they're not being given feedback on what's working and being able to understand what subtle tweaks are needed in order to make sure that highly effective instruction is taking place each and every day.
How is that cycle then closed? If you're observing a very good teacher who could be doing something great, is there a mechanism, is there a share out? What's the mechanism for getting that feedback back to that teacher individually and the cohort and so on?
Just to repeat the question, it has to do with how does the evaluative information get shared back or reflected back to the teachers?
Within 20 organizations, it's going to look a little different. Some teachers or some schools are going to use a Google Doc so that they've got this uniform sharing. Others are going to have a direct face-to-face. Some are going to do it in writing. So what we're proposing and what we're supporting is not a cookie-cutter, one-size-fits-all approach, depending on the culture and climate within the school, meaning the professional culture and climate, but making sure that we have expectations, but how they meet those expectations is really based on the configuration of each school. But it's a yes and proposition, not an either or. Thank you.
So the short answer is no, it's not a limitation of improvement science. I think it was a limitation given where we were at. I was working with a different school, not a high school, around the same time period. They started at special education students not performing at a level of expectation for them, and also not at district levels of expectations. That clearly started pushing in on instruction. It took an inordinate amount of time to even identify what part of instruction we might consider even looking at. One teacher stood up and said, I'm willing to look at my class because I teach reading across this entire grade, all 3 grades that the school had. But it becomes very touchy very quickly, and that team failed to substantively progress the project forward, in part because there were trust issues. I unfortunately unearthed a larger school-wide trust issue that this little simple project was not going to come. And so the project was pretty much dead on arrival in terms of, until they got through that, it was really hard to even learn how to do it, right? So that said, with this school, I mean, one of the reasons we got there was we said, can we just sit through some classes, just kind of see what it looks like? Nobody in this room is shocked by it, but it was categorized by constant interruption, by kids coming in late and by kids leaving, and this constant in and out flow of children in the room, so that instruction, why might kids be failing is, well, attendance and tardiness has a big issue with it because it's this roil of kids coming in and out, and so when does instruction happen? So I think for us, it was, let's go there because that's a bigger non-personal kind of thing of I'm a bad teacher or something. Yeah, a colleague of ours was working down at first grade with reading, right? A very different set of projects he was working on. And they did touch instruction. Amazing work, amazing work. Part of it was he was formerly district staff, high-level staff, that he already had trust relationships with all these schools. So they allowed him to come in and bought into what he was saying, let's try and do. He worked with whole teams of teachers, and they broke apart their instruction. They looked at what materials they had. They paced their materials as a team. They did all the things that all the teachers do all the time. They just did it as a collective in a systematic way, and they did tests. How can we improve this? Let's do these tests. Let's do these tests. And another interesting thing he did was we have benchmark testing just like about everyone, I think. And it comes out at this grain size of you're a red kid, you're a yellow kid, you're a green kid, right? You're proficient, you're approaching, or you're not. He actually helped them take their own data and break it out into all the sub-skills of reading at that grade level. And the one that sticks in my head is a teacher talking about, they're looking at this report and it's a sea of red, right? Kids are not on level. And the teachers, our kids come in like that. That's what we're working with. We're doing what we can. Break it apart and realize that red kids aren't red in every skill. Red kids have sufficient green in lots of skills and yellows in others. And that conversation with the data, it's the same data, just shown differently. Broach conversations of, I can get Marc to green on that one next week, right? He's really close, let's go there. And they did that systematically. And it's powerful. I don't remember his final numbers, but by mid-year benchmark, they had surpassed their year-end goal. I think their year goal was like an increase of 15 percentage points of kids being proficient. They surpassed it by December. That's amazing, right? And all it took was they were there to do it. They knew he did nothing special. All he did was leverage the knowledge that teachers already have and the things they already do and made it systematic, and it became apparent to everyone. And they go, we can do that. It's not, I think it's a really powerful, and that's why the short answer to your question, long-winded way about it, is no, it's not a limitation. It's just got to be in the right context.
Questions? Oh, come on. Yes.
Sorry, I will use teacher voice. Just to follow up on, this is very loud, on what you just said about improvement science. In terms of, as doctoral students looking to publish, how do you reconcile that with kind of the pressure of research and wanting to publish these big, giant studies and not the academy not rewarding that kind of micro level improvement science work?
I'll give you an honest answer, Adam. I actually know Adam. I got promoted in spite of working on this, right? It's a risk. As an academic, it's potentially risky because the payoff doesn't end in a journal article in 3-6 months that you can get into a year-long queue, right? People don't have the patience for that kind of work. Now, that said, where are we now? We're in a place where we can do some really cool things, right? We are working with a school. There's just acres and acres of space to do really deep qualitative work in this school to understand what's really going on with attendance. But then improvement science it's science, right? That wheel, that's the basic wheel of science, right? There's data collection, there's hypotheses, then there's tests of those hypotheses. That's publishable. Now, you're hitting on something really important. Most journal articles don't look like that, right? I don't think, and we've talked to the folks at Carnegie who are really deep pushing this space, they've had problems publishing because it doesn't look like the setup punch of an academic article. Doesn't mean it's impossible, but at this state, it's potentially risky as an academic to do such things. But I came out of schools, right? So it resonates with me. I'm in a school of education. My business is thinking about how to improve education. This, for me, is one of those places where there's real synergy to be had there of bringing really on seemingly micro problems, actual movement, right? So again, long-winded way. I wouldn't discourage you from doing it, but keep your eyes open if you're an academic of what's the trajectory you're on and how long do you have to give it.
Yeah, within our
Sounds
office,
negative.
we partner with a number of academic institutions in the area, and we see these kinds of tensions and challenges. So that one of the beauties of these partnerships is that you can have people embedded in the academic world bring a set of skills, and people embedded in the district bring a set of resources and system knowledge and understanding the logistics. And when that works well, that works really well, and it doesn't always work really well. As Dr. Stein is saying, that one of the things that can potentially be a barrier to things working well is when the academic agenda interferes with or conflicts with the district's agenda. That can happen. But having said that, I think that we're seeing in our work with other people at Penn and Temple and Drexel that the model is evolving. That I do think that we're seeing a movement towards academic education professionals that are becoming increasingly aware of things that they need to understand about the way schools function, and people within schools that are increasingly aware of the necessity of having a strong evidence base that is nimble and responsive to their needs as a necessary component going forward, and only going to become more so with ESSA and other kinds of evidence-based imperatives coming from top down. Our office, of course, welcomes this. We're big fans of evidence, but just to ramble on for a moment about your question.
When I was looking at Dr. McDowell's presentation, I was actually thinking about the kind of stuff that Dr. Stein was talking about an improvement science approach to. You had very clear goals that are pretty obviously based on a lot of research that you read that I've read that is kind of out there on what tends to work, but the devil's in the details. How do you really get the school to improve the attendance? How do you really get the kids to reduce the dropouts? How do you accomplish these things? What small changes are working in the right direction, what aren't? And the obvious, to me, tool to use would be the very one that the Burke folks were talking about. And I'm curious whether, I don't know, I couldn't tell from Dr. McDowell's presentation, are you guys working with this improvement science work to accomplish it seems like sort of a marriage made in heaven, maybe I'm playing. So are you doing that?
So my quick answer to that would be it might depend on exactly how literally you mean that. Let me switch mics here. Definitely, sort of as a district, we're trying very hard to have this iterative process of evaluation and ongoing improvement, and it looks very much, we're not necessarily calling it improvement science as we're doing it, but we could take what we're doing and slap it right up on his cyclical slide, and it would fit right in. That the focus, the effort is to be mindful of whatever exists before you begin and leverage that. Attempt to implement, follow very closely the implementation so that you can evaluate the implementation. Provided you have implementation, evaluate the extent to which a well-implemented program produces outcomes. If it does or does not, in the process of doing all of that, you will, if you're being diligent, you will accumulate information that will inform the next decision. Whether it was specifically the thing that you thought would inform that next decision or not, if you're diligently gathering, we tend to do mixed methods, so we're often getting qualitative kinds of information as we've been discussing, but we're also looking very closely at quantitative administrative data. And if you're diligent about it and you look at all of that information, it usually provides you clues about what might be gumming up the works or what might be driving improvement. And it gives you clues about what to try next. And you might be right and you might be wrong. And if you're right, great. And if you're wrong, that's fine too, because you've now learned something that's going to improve your chances on the next cycle of making progress. So I guess from my perspective, it's less about identifying what is the specific move right now that is the move to make, and it's more about identifying the process that makes visible the candidate-specific moves. If you're doing your due diligence with collecting and considering the evidence, then some moves move themselves right off the table, other ones emerge that you might not have thought of, and then they become the candidates for the next cycle. Anyone else want to chime in?
I would agree with most of that. And I think I would even step back and say, I think the power comes from the problematizing the problem. What is our problem? And having that serious, deep conversation of because there's layers of problems, and I think it takes some time to actually get at what truly is our problem, and which then leads to real conversations about what can we potentially do. I think the other beauty here is it can happen at any scale, right? Improvement science work, we have some dear colleagues in the district that are using it in their daily work, in their teams, and I think it can be at all of those levels. It's going to look slightly different, but I think ultimately my hope would be being able to help schools use this in some form, so they're the best identifiers of problems, right? They're doing it every day. They're facing those same problems, and they're the best generators of ideas on some level. And they can generate ideas that could then be thought across the whole district. Right now, that's a long game of thinking, how do we develop this? Part of it is, how do we train teachers? Is this part of how we think about being a teacher or an administrator? So I know I'm on the precipice of rambling, but I think it's, I think it can work at all levels, but each level has its own set of tasks that we must accomplish to do our job and get paid, that we're expected to do. And sometimes improvement science doesn't look like it looks like it's something new that's going to take more time. But I think we're slowly seeing that if we do it, it actually takes some of the time pressure off, because we're not running down dark alleys anymore. We're not running down rabbit holes. We're learning something with every cycle. And so we could actually lessen time on task and get actual improvement for that time. Why don't you do it? So the other issue too is we can do this in one-off schools, right? And that school perhaps improves. But the real power comes when you start leveraging people in different places doing it and coming together. One of the things we saw is when we could get them in the same room, they could learn from each other. So an idea is having an innovation hub, if you will, of bring schools together working around. So our colleague Jared Bolte, working on first grade reading. Well, let's bring a school from Southeast Baltimore. Let's bring a school from the Northwest, a school from the West Side, and a school from the East Side, and bring them together. They're going to have slightly different problems, but they've got fundamentally the same problem. And when they can come together and say, oh, this is the novel idea we came up with, and it seemed to work for this group of kids, then that's where the real synergy is. Because I think I said it earlier, teachers know how to do this stuff. Teachers do this cycle already. It's just not systematic, and it's not captured. And so when you can bring them together in a systematic way, I think there's real potential there for improvement. And then districts can learn from that, I think.
And I think I just want to add in the crux kind of the cycle is the relationship. And I think a couple of people, Ted kind of spoke to it, and Dr. Stein a little bit about, there's a relationship that needs to happen between folks that are implementing and from kind of like have a programmatic lens versus folks that have an evaluative lens. Because if that is so disconnected, the cycle will continue to be broken, right? So whatever we want to call the cycle, whether it's improvement science or evaluation, whatever we call the cycle is broken if there's not a relationship there where each of the teams, if they're not the same person, which they rarely are communicating in a way that the information is useful, right? It's not, we're kind of lucky here that we have such a strong research and evaluation office and analytics where, as a program, I'm a program person, but because we have research and evaluation folks that work very closely with us, in addition to external evaluators, we all come to the table periodically. We evaluate the work of the programs that we do. We get recommendations on how to improve. We give them feedback about, yeah, we can't do that because the logistical pieces that they might not be privy to because it's not the body of their work. And that, I think, is critical to ensuring that the cycle continues and that there's always a new cycle